Good afternoon. Welcome back to AP US History. We are excited to have you here. We just finished up an hour with Laura and world history. And so we are glad to move on to US history. And the big news of the day is going to be the release of the information by the College Board about the AP test. It came out this morning, and we're going to cover it. We're going to talk about it here so that you can know what is going to be happening. We're going to get rolling with it and show you. I have it all condensed for you, actually. So we're going to talk about the 3 C's is our overall theme today. We're going to talk about Congress, Confederation, and Constitution. That's our main goal. However, we definitely want to also go over the information from the College Board because we want you to have that. That's extremely important. So let's get rolling with that. So here they are. This is a full summation of what is going to be happening with the AP. This is what we have. This is the information we have, which is what they have sent out. We kind of compiled what they sent out to give you an idea. So the AP exams are going to be taken at home. All of the ones that were supposed to be given at schools are not going to happen. So that is a big change, obviously. Every single AP test that's out there, every single subject that has a test has had about the last 5th cutoff. And so what that means for you is sections 7 and 8 for us have been removed. So that does not mean that the themes that are part of 7 and 8 are no longer part of the class. It just means they're not going to cover anything after World War II, it seems like, something along those lines. In other words, you're taking the history class I took when I was in high school, because in that class, nothing happened after World War II, apparently. But that's kind of what they're going to be doing. They're going to be cutting off like the last 60, 70, 80 years, stuff like that. And so that's less for you to know, less content for you to know. They're going to have 2 different test dates, and you can pick between the 2. You can take the test on any device, your computer, cell phone, tablet. They're even talking about accepting just handwritten work with pictures. The first question everyone's asked is, well, what about the cheating? They're supposedly doing a lot to avoid the cheating. They're going to figure out between programs and plagiarism stuff and all of that. That is one of their biggest goals. Starting next week, there's going to be some review courses running on College Board through AP Classroom. So definitely make sure you're checking on there to see when those run. Those are going to be like filling in the rest of the blanks, the things you haven't covered that they're still going to test on. And they're going to be taught by teachers from across the country. That'll be like 45 minutes long and talking about, an element of what they're still trying to cover. But all of that, all of the details of the exams and everything is going to come in on April 3rd. Okay. April 3rd is going to be the big day where they're going to give you the specifics of the actual test. So from what if you go on College Board and read what they said, they have canceled the exams in the schools. So even if schools reopen, that it does not look like they're going to be giving tests there. And the test is going to be sent to you, apparently. And so we've got there, but everything is still in flux. They didn't give exact details. April 3rd is the next big day, 2 weeks from today, to check and see what is going on. So we're learning this just like you are. We just found this out the same time that it was available to you. And so we're shifting just like you're shifting, okay? And but it's good for us to know this, because now we can kind of adjust. And the nice thing is what the College Board is going to cover is a lot of content, but what we try to cover is like, how do I piece that together? And so that's what we're going to work on in our classes with me over the next 6 sessions, is how do we deal with like the overarching themes. Speaking of themes, these are the themes. Again, I'll pull these back up. So according to the College Board, this and this, the details, the dates of those sessions, anything from those dates is not going to be covered. So the themes, though, themes like immigration and social responsibility and civil rights and stuff like that, those things still are going to be covered. So don't just ignore anything that is in those sessions, but the information from the dates are going to be removed. Okay. Cool. So, and the nice thing is, the thing for you to see is like what we're pulling up here. This is going to be exactly like what they're asking, is how do things interrelate? That's an overarching thread, that how these things tie together. You know, history is not in a vacuum. It does not exist outside of other events. And so what happens in 1785 still has bearings on us today. And so being able to grab that thread and run it through all the way through history, that's going to be an important quality to have. So we still want you to know the content. That's something you still need to study. But seeing how the content pieces together to where you can make this chain of events, one leading to one, one leading to one, one leading to one, that is going to be so important on the test. Okay, so the American Revolution was interrelated with other wars. Yeah, it was. It didn't start just out of nowhere. It had some influence that caused it, and then it caused other things. And so being aware of that is going to be really, really critical. So you had the French and Indian War, which, by the way, is mostly being called the 7 Years' War now. That was going to lead to that caused a problem in the fact that now there were some new treaties that were blocking, you know, where people could go and what people could do. And so then that's led to some unhappiness. And it also led to war debt. And when war debt comes along, well, who's going to pay for it, you know? The Pontiac's Rebellion was as a result of the 7 Years' War, in the fact that they were not happy with these new restrictions. They were not happy with people breaking the agreement and running over what the agreed lines were. Then the American Revolution came along, which the jump from here to here and from here to here, you had a lot of it was going to be monetary, in the fact that England accumulated a lot of expenses and they felt that the colonies should pay for it. And so they raised taxes. And so you can see that this chain of, oh, this war, it didn't just stop. It led to this, which led to this, which led to the American Revolution, which, because of the French involvement in these different conflicts, now they had war debt. And that war debt led to ultimately the French Revolution. And also the belief, hey, if they can do it, then we can do it. And so that the French Revolution never would have happened if the American Revolution had not happened. So developments, again, nailing all of this down, finding the threads of how these things go together. The British, they basically had booted the French out. They're the main power. All of the other ones are, not doing what they were doing before. The British is the dominant colonial power. They realize, hey, your militia cannot stand up to this. And it also made them think, maybe it's not going to be so hard to enforce this, maybe it's not going to be so hard to enforce what we want to do because, they're not going to stand up to us. That huge war debt, like we said, somebody's got to pay it. Who's going to pay it? British are like, we're not going to pay it. It's not us. You're going to pay it. Colonists, on the other hand, though, were like, hey, we beat the French and the Indians. Look at what we did. They didn't see themselves as being weak. They didn't see themselves as, not having enough, power and strength to keep themselves safe. They were like, hey, we did it. And they did, but they didn't like what the British were doing. These British officers are treating the American militia like, junior Jedis. They're like, you're not doing a good job. And the militia were like, hey, that's not nice. Don't do that to us. And so they didn't appreciate that. So you start to see these points where there is tension to where this can develop further on. They didn't appreciate being told, you can't go any further than this. They're like, wait a minute. What right do you have to tell us we can't keep going west? I'm like, there's this big land over there that we want to expand. We want to start having more room. We want to start, seeing what else is out there. You can't tell us on our behalf that we can't go. You're negotiating on our behalf. Thanks. No. So then again, now there's a big problem. The American Indians, they're like, no, you can't take our land. No, we don't want to give this up. This was not a pleasant situation. So this goes back to units 1 and 2. And if you go back and review those about which countries were located where in the New World, well, the French, they were up north in like the Canada region and upper New England. And so they're up there and they had a great relationship with the Indians. That's why they fought on the same side. British did not. They did not have a great relationship with the Indians. And so you can see that that treatment back then has now led to this. And now there's this harsh interaction. There's a lot of people feeling, really not nice towards each other, all of these past skirmishes. And so there's like this history of not getting along. So Chief Pontiac attacks the settlements out there on the frontier because they're saying, listen, this was our, this is our border. This is what we said, and now you're violating it. So what the heck, So then King George, at the end of this, signs the proclamation of 1763, telling the Americans, no, you can't go past that. And they're like, well, we need to, because now they've driven the French out. So now there's a vacuum where the French were involved as far as the fur trade goes. And so they're like, hey, we want to keep the peace. So why don't you just stop going past the mountains? And the colonists are like, why don't you stop telling me what to do? And they did not follow through. So number 5, so we've got a question up here, and I'm going to put a 1-minute timer up so you can look at it and kind of think through it. If you were here yesterday, which hopefully some of you were, but if not, welcome. If you were here yesterday, though, you remember we said make sure you always read the entire question, because there are going to be specific words that are going to change how you view it. Okay? So I'm going to tell you, as a reminder, make sure you read the entire question, every word. So here's a minute to go ahead and give it a try, read it, and tell us what you think it is. So immediately, that's the word that we want to pay attention to. What happened right after the 7 Years' War? Not later on. Because like, oh yeah, we're going to declare our independence eventually, but that's not what happened right away. We wanted to find out basic, almost like chronology, which one of these happened first, which one of these happened immediately after the 7 Years' War. Now, on the test, as a recap, there were more than likely not going to be multiple choice questions. So the point of getting this is I want you to see, make sure you know the content, but then also how does this affect later on decisions. So in this one, it is B, which is what everybody was saying in the chat. Nice job, one and all. Cyber high five, excellent. They wanted to settle those lands. That was their initial goal. Like that's the first thing they wanted to do. All of these other things, did they want to repay debt? No, they didn't. So that was not something they did immediately after. Their goal was to keep pushing west, even though the English were also trying to keep peace so that they didn't have to keep getting dragged into fights across the ocean. The Americans were like, well, honestly, we don't care. We can deal with our stuff. Shut up. And so that was what they wanted to do. And this push ends up continuing to put the Americans, the colonists, in conflict with the Indians and in conflict with the British, which then spills together and starts causing other problems. All right, number 6, which of the following was a result of colonial encroachment on native lands? This one I'm going to give you 30 seconds because it's one of those, like, you probably know it if you or you don't. It's not like you're going to go look it up or anything. So 30 seconds, go for it. I try to underline something and then there's spoilers. Spoilers on screen twice pop up. Sorry about that. But yes, it is going to be, as you probably already saw, the uprising led by Pontiac is going to be the result of the encroachment there. And again, it's like a direct result. So there you go. And yeah, technology. Right? So again, Proclamation of 1763 said, don't go past this point. And the settlers were like, no, we don't want to hear you. And then they did. They went past it. So some more results from the 7 Years' War. Oh man, we know all about these, right? We're starting to hit that era of history that your teacher spends a lot of time on, where then you run out of other time to cover anything after World War II. But here it is, the Currency Act, Quartering Act, Sugar Act, Stamp Act. All of this is done to keep things under control and to get money back. And so the colonists, as you may assume, weren't happy about any of these things. In fact, the Stamp Act Congress said, you don't have the right to do this. The only people who have the right to do this is people who have the colonial legislatures. This is that whole taxation without representation bit. Parliament was like, you have representation, sort of. I mean, whatever. But neither of them agreed. Like England, basically what England was doing was as these congresses and legislatures send things to England, they don't even respond, because to respond would validate those governments in the colonies. And the colonies are saying, well, we don't answer to you because we don't have any say. And so it's like this thing where it's like, you know, when you see it in movies where two people won't talk to each other and you're like, you go tell so and so, and there's that one person stuck in the middle. Like that's Ben Franklin, person stuck in the middle. But that's what's going on, is that they're saying I don't have to listen to what you say, and then they're saying, well, I'm not going to listen to what you say, and it was kind of immature. Same thing. So like this was it. Later on, the king's like, no, I don't. They don't listen. He doesn't listen to any of it. He's just like, I'm not even paying attention to this because you don't have the right to even send me the document, which is further getting the colonies all worked up. So the Second Continental Congress led to the Articles of Confederation, which had problems. It was not a great conception. It was not something that like was going to last a long time. Obviously, the central government was extremely weak because at this point, state law, state rule, colony rule is still the main idea. They're like, we listen, we don't want a strong central government. We just got out of the strong central government. We don't want to answer to a king. We don't want to have to deal with this. So it's like every colony is going to have a say. Every colony is going to be the most important thing in the world. They wanted super majorities to pass laws. Well, that's not, those are not easy to pass. I mean, you can see how hard it is to pass things with a simple majority. A super majority of like 2/3, that's even worse. The central government could do some things. However, they still had to get individual states to agree, a 2/3 majority to get them to even do anything. So again, it's like, what is the point of the central government if any decision that they're making is going to be questioned and debated again? So they could not raise or levy taxes, raise money, and they did not have a strong military, as Shays' Rebellion is going to show, which does pop up later on today. We're going to talk about Shays' Rebellion and how that may actually affect some, like a question type you might see on the test. So all right, I don't know what was going on there. It's like all of a sudden the slides were acting like American colonists. No, I'm not doing what you told me to do. Listen, you're going to switch slides. No, I'm not. Nice try, bud. I'm not doing it. So the Constitutional Convention, this is going to be where they are trying to like adapt. Some of them wanted to like adapt the Articles of Confederation, but it doesn't work, okay? Because the Articles of Confederation was not a good document to start with. Notice how we just skipped over the entire Revolutionary War. It's like, oh, what happened? Something happened in between those two events. I don't know what that was. But yeah, so we've skipped to the Constitutional Convention. So we have the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan, because we have this issue where we've got big states and little states. Fortunately, we don't have that problem now. But yeah, there are big states and there are little states, and little states are like, hey, how about we make sure you let us get full representation. We want this equal say as the big states. And the big states are like, no, we're putting out more money. We're putting out more men. We want this based on the size of the state, not the fact that you're a state. You can see where each side was coming from. You're self-preservation. There also, though, was this brewing problem between northern states and southern states, where what do we do about the slave population? The southern states wanted them counted as full people. Irony of ironies, they wanted them counted as full people for population's sake, even though they had no rights, weren't even considered people in those states. The North is like, are you crazy? No, you don't even treat them like people. Why are they people? We don't count your chair as a person. We don't count your house as a person. I mean, if that's how they're being treated, then why should we treat them any differently? So they did have this compromise that came in 1787, which actually the House part, the legislature part, was brilliant. We're going to have two houses. We're going to have one based on population. We're going to have one based on states. And so that has worked well. And there's a reason why they did it the way they did it. So the Senate, equal representation, states are going to remain states. So that is reflected in the fact that senators have a 6-year term. And so they're not out as quickly. The House is going to be constantly adjusting based on population. So like the census that's coming out, you may have seen the envelope come to your house recently about Census 2020. The census, when it comes out, is going to lead to an adjustment in population and an adjustment in the House of Representatives based on population movement. Those terms roll over much faster. And the theory was that the states would constantly be sending new ideas into Washington through the representatives. So people would go, serve a term, and come home, which is exactly what happens now. No, it isn't. Now we have people go and then they never leave. That was never the intention. The intention with a bicameral legislature was that there would be stability from the Senate and the House would constantly be bringing the current state of America in. That did not continue. Slaves, though, were counted as 3/5 of a person. That's how the slaves being counted as population was dealt with. Disgusting, yes, but there is something what they do. And then you have the Anti-Federalists. They're wary about this central government. They're worried about how that's going to impact people's liberties. And that's where the Bill of Rights comes in, to make sure that those are protected. So as we're heading into this long essay question, so this is what it was called on the previous tests. And just as a recap, the news that came out today, if you want to look on College Board, is that the tests are going to be 45 minutes long. They're going to apparently be free response. So your knowledge of content is going to be shown by your ability to include it in these student response questions. So this is a great example of it. This stuff, I'm not going to pay attention to this right now. This is based on the old format. But this is still good. Go through, dissect the question, come up with a thesis, and then plan your evidence. So what do they really want me to do? How can I do it? And then what evidence am I going to use? So and then obviously write your essay. Because if you don't write the essay, it's not like you can go, hey, I did all of this stuff. But also, we're not talking about an essay. We're talking about student response. So here's an example of what we're talking about. We mentioned Shays' Rebellion earlier. And so this is a question, a sample prompt from the test, but you could still see how this could be utilized on the current test, where you have to show your content knowledge about Shays' Rebellion, but also you have to show it about the Articles of Confederation, you have to show it about the Constitution, because you need to know how it affected all of those things. So this is going to be a good example. So first of all, dissect the question. What happened as a result of Shays' rebellion? That's what we're going to want to know. How much did those things that came along afterwards, how did that shape the future of the United States and its formation, the government, the political development? Do you have examples of how to tie those together? I'd like to actually point out, okay, this did this did this. But are there also any other events that may have the same level of connection? So the thing is like you don't want to answer this, sorry. You don't want to answer it by saying, well, Shays' Rebellion was the single most important thing to lead to the political development of the United States. If there is another event that has as much to do with it. If you're going to say that this one event is the single most important, well, you better have enough evidence to demonstrate that. And you need to have enough knowledge of other events to be able to say those were not as important. And so that's what the questions we ask. And the first one popped up out of order. And it's like, but you can kind of surmise what it's saying. So if it's like, if there was, I'm just saying if there was like Shays' Rebellion, but then there was also like Bob's Uprising. And then there also was Jim's slap fight. So there's like, now there's like these three events. Which one of them had more of an influence? So let's say we've got three events. Are all of them equally responsible? Was Shays like 50% responsible, and then Bob's Uprising was 25%, and then Jim's slap fight was another 25%? Is that how it was? Or, was Shays more important? And so like that's a question we would have to ask, because it said the extent, not just did it, yes or no, but to what extent. And so we have to kind of come up with a percentage or an evaluation of its importance. So, Jim's slap fight, that was a pretty big event, if you know what I'm talking about. I don't know. So I want you to do is like looking at this, I want you guys to think and try to come up with how, what extent do you think that it had an effect? Okay. So I'm going to put I'm going to give you a time on the clock. I'm going to give you a minute and a half. I just want you to think through Shays' Rebellion, what exactly it did, and what it could have shown, and how it could have caused something to happen later on. Then we'll hop on and then I kind of see, can we come up with some examples and stuff like that? So I'll give you a minute to think, and then I may put another minute back on. Okay? So think about it. Okay, so Shays Rebellion. I was giving you time to think about how do you think it affected the development of the political scene in the United States? So Shays Rebellion, if to remind you that there's going to be Shays. It wasn't just named after. Who's Shays? There's no Shays here. He's a veteran. He fought in the Revolutionary War. Of all people, you know, this should not have happened that way. But those people felt like they were not being listened to. They felt that they were being mistreated. They felt that the enforcement of things, the corruption, they're like, listen, guys, we just fought a big war to get rid of people like this. And now you guys are doing the same thing. And so, no, we don't like this. Tell me in the chat, what are some things that developed? What are some things that the rebellion showed the new America that needed dealt with, besides that the Articles of Confederation may not have been dealing with? Tell me in the chat. What are some things that Shays Rebellion brought to light? And we have a screen talking about all of that. So, oh, this is going to help us formulate our thesis. That's why I'm asking you guys to like say what some of the results were, because then that's going to help us determine, did this have a huge impact on things or did it not have a huge impact on things? Go ahead and put them in the chat. So Favor says a stronger government. Yeah, yes, definitely. Molly, a more structured government. Yes, definitely. Because it started to highlight some of the main problems in the Articles of Confederation, which, if you remember, we were saying it did not have a strong central government. So there was no way for them to deal with a situation like this. Good. Centralized military, stop future uprising. Nice. You guys did it. You got it. So what this thesis is, that we're like, the way we would address this is saying that it was the main catalyst. This is a bold statement. So this is like the thesis we're going with, just to kind of deal with this question. It was the main catalyst that led to the new Constitution. Oh, if we're going to say that, we'd better prove it. Okay. So how do we prove that? We got to plan our evidence. We got to think about how we proved this. Like you guys are saying, there was a serious problem with the fact that there was the central government had no power to raise an army, to deal with any of these kind of conflicts. There was not a good way to get taxes paid. There was not a good way to get rid of the debts. Basically, every state was going to be responsible for their own debts. And it's like, what? And there's just like so many problems that pop up. And so think about like, what were some of the causes even of the American Revolution? Are those being dealt with? And it just kind of like floats along. You start to see, okay, so this thread, you pull at this thread and you're like, all right, so here's the thread, we pull it off, it's coming out right here. And then it's like, so that's the uprising from England. And then we grab this and we keep going. And so now we fought and we got our independence. Now the country's acting exactly like that. And so we have to come up with some kind of answer to this. And so that's why in this particular essay, they would say that Shays was the most important thing to make the shift from a confederation to a stronger central government, which, as if you've seen Hamilton, you know that is not a popular decision. The Constitution was not just a easy jump shot. It was not a propose it and it's good. it was severely fought because people were terrified. They were terrified. They did not want a king. They wanted a president. You know, they wanted somebody who was not there for life. You know, and it's like, hey, wait, this is the best leader around. This is George Washington. And it's like, what the deal? He leaves. They want somebody who's going to leave. They don't want a continuous monarch. They want there to be a flow and a change. That's how it keeps the several governments from becoming what they were terrified of. So all of those things, they're still able to keep those mindsets, that the reasons that they hated George III, and then, but at the same time, keep the structure and like security of having a main government. All right. So I do have some other questions here about Jay's treaty that we could look at, about how, you know, what happened with that. Again, these are going to be multiple choice though. So instead of doing these, what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna go back. Let's go back to the breaking news and kind of just like to think about how this could manifest itself. Okay, so this section, this era that we just talked about, was the era prior to, or right at the beginning of, from colonies to the new America being born. And so start thinking about ways that they could ask questions that are going to involve a broader scope. Because to avoid the cheating that people are concerned about, like number 5, you're not going to be able to do, they're not going to do multiple choice. They're going to do ones where you have to generate an answer. So the topics that we're going to see are going to be ones that are those bigger threads, those broader concepts, connecting the dots between things. And so as you're studying, as you're preparing for this test, start really driving home those connections as well. How does the stuff we covered yesterday, where it's the Europeans arriving, the colonies being set up, the way the colonies were run, how does that affect this era? Well, it's going to affect this era because of the way the French dealt with situations versus the way the British dealt with situations, how the American Indians were treated by both countries. Also, it's going to be there's going to be problems because you do have so many different backgrounds, so many different colonies. Each one of them were founded for a different, each one was founded for a different reason. So how do we still keep all of those different mindsets alive? How do we keep those different identities alive while also uniting together? And so at the beginning, the colonies were not, it wasn't like they were like, hey, cool, you're over here too, yay. I mean, they were like completely like, leave me alone. They did their own thing. The states just, they did their own, the colonies did their own thing. And so how did that mesh over time? Because what started to happen was a national identity. And so that ends up, that's a big concept, like the concept of nationalism. This is a big concept. And like, when did that rise? When did that develop in America, where it stopped being separate colonies and started being America? And that what was best for America was what was more important than what was best for each state. That happened somewhere. What do you think that point was? So those are like some questions that you can ask yourself as you're getting prepared. Is where did that point come where they were willing to fight as a united country? Was it after the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War? Was it at that point where they were like, okay, we did this, and started to see themselves as an us against them kind of situation. Was that the breaking point? Was it something before that? Those are all questions to think about and start to, that goes beyond just content, And so learning the content, very important, but you're going to show your content knowledge by the ability to connect dots. Another type thing that like later on we would cover normally in our like later units, which time wise, as far as like dates go, is not going to be covered on the test, like the 50s, 60s, 80s, stuff like that. But concepts about civil rights, concepts about the role of women, role of minorities, and looking back to this era and seeing what was the situation here. Well, one of the situations here was, we just saw, as far as voting goes, women weren't allowed to vote. It was property owners, men, which were men. Women couldn't own property. They couldn't vote. They weren't given the right to vote for a very long time, at least, over 200 years. And so it ends up being that's an ongoing thing. Where do women fit in this society? Where do minorities fit in this society? And it's not just where do blacks fit in, but where do the American Indians fit in? They don't. Okay, that's why they get rid of them. Where do people that have come up from Mexico and things like that, where do they fit in? They don't. And so that's kind of like how this early establishment, like how the country viewed things at the very beginning, is going to determine that. So one of the things, you guys have more time. I know that right now, this whole situation with the virus and everything's an upheaval. I know it's really tough. I mentioned it yesterday. I've got a senior, a sophomore, and a sixth grader. And we've got more questions than we have answers. We have 10 times more questions than we have answers. And we don't have any clue how this is going to go. So all we can do is keep preparing. We got to keep getting ready. We know the tests are coming. So we got to get ready for the tests. The nice thing is that you do have a little more freedom in how you prepare. Like you can watch the videos on AP Classroom. Obviously you want to watch those. You want to use their resources because College Board is the one who puts out the tests. But like us hanging out here, one of the cool things is we can kind of think through outside of the scope of just content, just details and facts. We can kind of think about those more drawn out connections. And so there are books out there, like 1491, or like I mentioned yesterday, the New York Times series on the slave trade. And there's a book by Zwink, Zwink, about the founding of America from a different point of view, which is not the European point of view. And so recognizing some of those things, that's actually going to broaden your ability to answer questions, is to think about things not just knowing all the dates, but how do they tie together? And that there are things that happen in the 1700s, 1600s, that we're still paying for today. Honestly, the seeds were sown back then, and we still pay for it at this point. There are still ramifications. And decisions made here are going to have ramifications 100 years from now, 200 years from now. And so that's an important lesson to learn in life, but also for this test, it's an important lesson to learn that everything has to fit together somehow, and there's going to be a ramification at the end. So those are some important thoughts to have as you're preparing and thinking through everything. Next week, we're going to go and we'll pick up. Hopefully you can hang out with us again. Monday through Friday, we're planning on being here at 2 o'clock. We're going to pick up with one of the other most covered eras of human history, of American history, Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. We'll probably do a little, well, I think we do some before that. So let's look at what we've got. Yeah, U.S. foreign policy. We'll talk about that. That's our next one. Monday, we're going to talk about that, like how the U.S. starts interacting once it realizes it's a real thing, like it's a real country, how it starts interacting, and then talking about Civil War. So Monday we're going to be talking about how the U.S. starts flexing. You could look at it that way, how the U.S. starts flexing on other nations. And so it also is going to deal with the War of 1812. Then we'll move into Civil War. So again, think about this, okay? That idea of manifest destiny, that idea that those colonists had about why you can't tell me that I can't cross the Appalachians, okay? So the Proclamation of 1763, where they're told, you're not allowed to go any further west. And the colonies are like, shut up. That mindset never goes away. And so after the Revolutionary War, after the US is set up, after the War of 1812, they do start flexing. They start being, they're like, listen, we're going all the way to the other end. I don't know what's out there, but we're going to go over and take it. And so that leads to them expanding west. That leads to the US saying, why don't we have an empire? Why don't we have lands overseas? And so some of the stuff we're going to be talking about Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, they again are reflected right here. So that mindset that seems so minor of you can't cross this border into Ohio, that mindset is ingrained in the country to where it leads to so many more conflicts later on. And so again, it's kind of, as a history, I get excited, and some of you probably don't because you're like, I hate history. I hear you, I understand. But I get excited thinking about some of those things just because it's just kind of cool to see the puzzles pieces click together and everything. So you got to forgive me for that. I guess it's better than me not liking this at all. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with us again today. Tell your friends, tell some people, say, hey, come on, this thing's cool. It's free. You can hang out with them. They talk about fun stuff and they show toys on screen. So we'll see you guys hopefully on Monday. Have an awesome weekend. Thanks again. At the top of the hour, we're starting biology. And so you can hang out there and see Ari and Nick, and they are amazing also. So have a good weekend. I will see you next week.